Let's get this out of the way. Bravely Default 2 is not the second Bravely game, and depending on how you classify Square Enix games with underlined titles or ones made by Tomoya Asano, Bravely Default 2 might be the fourth or fifth game in its extended family. But one thing is certain, Bravely Default 2 is an outstanding new school RPG with old school sensibilities that wears its influences on its sleeve. Another thing Bravely Default 2 isn't, a direct sequel to either Bravely Default or Bravely Second. Switch owners need not worry about playing its predecessors to enjoy Bravely Default 2, as it shares no characters, locations, or plot threads with those two RPGs. BD2 also abandons a few key gameplay concepts from the original 3DS duo, and I'm not sure it was for the best. I was obsessed with Bravely Default and Bravely Second for over a month each at the time of their releases, so I approached Bravely Default 2 from the standpoint of a superfan hungry for more. While Bravely Default 2 is mostly excellent, mostly is a loaded adverb. Our protagonist Seth is a shipwrecked sailor who washes onto the continent of Excelant following a storm he was unlikely to survive, and shortly afterward meets the sort of exiled Princess Gloria of Musa, Gloria's knight protector Sir Sloan, the traveling scholar Elvis, and Elvis's mercenary companion Adele. These 5 new allies thwart a kidnapping attempt near the kingdom of Halcyonia, and by destiny and or coincidence decide to work together to battle the warmongering empire of Holograd, spreading chaos in Excelant and gather the 4 elemental crystals to prevent a world-spanning apocalypse. These 2 quests of stopping Holograd and finding the crystals are a Venn diagram that's just a single circle. The Hologradians are the group that destroyed Gloria's home kingdom and stole its sacred crystals, and the Empire either doesn't care about or isn't aware of the crystal's seal on an evil entity. Elvis is on a journey to find Asterisks, stones of power that grant ancient knowledge to their wielders, and is so chuffed to find 3 new Asterisks in Halcyonia that he has no qualms helping Gloria accomplish her goals. Elvis is easygoing and nonchalant to a fault. The delightfully sassy Adele stays with the team out of her obligation to Elvis, but is also searching for her missing sister. Seth has nowhere to go in this new land, and he joins the team out of a vague sense of justice held by many RPG main characters. If this tale sounds like several Final Fantasy games, those asterisks sound like jobstones from a few Final Fantasy games, and Princess Gloria sounds like at least a couple of RPG maidens, often princesses, duty-bound to save the world, then I share your suspicions. Bravely Default 2's similarities to Final Fantasy V might be worthy of a separate piece for RPGFan, but are at least worth acknowledging here. More importantly, the gameplay changes from Bravely Default and Bravely Second to Bravely Default 2 mirror the changes made to Final Fantasy over its first decade. Bravely Default 2 abandons the turn-based combat of its predecessors for an active time battle system with initiative and turn order determined by speed stats and attack delays. This perhaps inflates the importance of jobs and equipment builds with high speed, as more actions is always a good outcome. It also incentivizes players not to plan out actions round by round, but instead plan out patterns of attacks, boosts, and heals in a more individually focused manner, because you won't always have characters with equal numbers of turns. There is also an encumbrance stat not found in previous Bravely games, which drastically slows and weakens your character if you try to equip powerful armor and weapons at too low a level or at an inappropriate job. Yet, combat retains a signature element of other Bravely games, the Brave Default system. Characters can spend BP to Brave and take multiple turns in a row, up to 4 at once, or Default to guard for 1 turn and gain an extra BP. Under normal circumstances, each character and enemy gains 1 BP per turn. If a character has negative BP, they take extra damage and cannot act until they get back to 0 BP. Managing your BP is key to success in Bravely Default 2, especially since enemies can take advantage of the system as easily as players can. The job system, not quite inherited wholesale from Bravely Default or Bravely Second, is brilliant in the other games of the Brave Path family, and is a highlight again in Bravely Default 2. The player obtains 24 asterisks throughout the game, starting with 2, then obtaining 19 from story boss fights and 3 from optional bosses, and across that battle-ready buffet there is a wide variety of skill tinkering and visual interest. Traditional Final Fantasy Black Mages now have stylish coats and fedora hats. The Swordmaster job grants special super moves and strategies for wielding 1 sword in 2 hands, or 1 sword in each hand. And the Oracle job combines manipulating time and space with explosive elemental magic. One simple yet devastating combination is to equip Thief as a sub-job to high-speed asterisks like Dragoon or Phantom, and deal incredible damage with the Godspeed Strike skill. I won't overburden you with too many details, but this job system is both deep and fun to explore. The combat and job systems interact in Asterisk boss fights, which represent at least 80% of the game's boss battles and the primary means of obtaining new Asterisks. These fights are spread throughout each chapter, typically 4 or 5 in each, and are equally key story moments, battles for survival, and combat puzzles. Determining the Asterisk holder's pattern and weaknesses while surviving against their offense is a challenge on its own, but Bravely Default 2's abundance of counter mechanics make it even more challenging than normal. Many bosses in BD2 can activate counterattacks or gain free BP for all actions taken by the player, from attacks to defensive spells to item use. Asterisk holders gain BP so easily during player turns that they act 4 times in a single turn with startling frequency. Major boss fights where enemies act 4 times in a row can be quite challenging, perhaps obviously. The difficulty curve for Bravely Default 2 spikes at a few of these boss fights. I personally found the final fights of Chapters 1 and 3, as well as one specific Asterisk holder in Chapter 4, tougher than the final boss. I was able to beat all of the major fights in this game that I attempted, including some, but not all, optional post-game bosses, without extensive level grinding, but a few of them took several tries and adjustments. Bravely Default 2's difficulty feels higher than most turn-based RPGs of its ilk, but never unfair or excessive. It definitely matters that I played the game on normal mode. Building a loadout of jobs to suit boss battles is crucial, especially since there are 13 damage types, 6 weapons and 7 magic elements, and every enemy in the game is weak to at least 2. Each character has up to 5 slots for passive skills earned from job levels, plus a chosen sub-job that conveys all the commands learned from that job to the character, which is similar to Final Fantasy V or Final Fantasy Tactics, and near identical to Bravely Default and Bravely Second. But more importantly, the Asterisk fights have a greater story tie-in than in games past. The 22 major Asterisk holders, there is none for Freelancer and another one is only seen in flashbacks, don't have their stories end upon their defeat. Bravely Default 2 has a vast set of side quests, with more generating in every new town with every new chapter. Defeated Asterisk holders are often brought back as subjects in these side quests and given small subplots ranging from redemption to grief to romance. The volume of side quests in Bravely Default 2 is a little daunting, but a lot of them are well written, and it was usually fun to revisit the mostly appealing character designs of these Asterisk bosses. But maybe the best part of these Asterisk holders is their battle theme. Revo, the music composer for Bravely Default and Bravely Second, did a fabulous job with the sound design of Bravely Default 2, with RPG tunes running the gamut between intense battle themes, energetic character themes, and serene town music. Each town is a distinctive character and tone in large part because of the great soundtrack. No complaints here. Maps and dungeon areas were a weakness in Bravely Default and haven't changed much in the sequel. The open areas have more details, treasure chests, and hackable trees and grass than before. We're talking nearly Zelda levels of landscaping opportunities here, but nothing more complicated than walking along a river to find a bridge. Dungeon areas are similar, with some pleasant looks but rather boring layouts peppered with local monsters. Gone are the random encounters and adjustable encounter rate of Bravely Default, replaced by enemies visible in the field that can be struck for attack advantage. Monsters will run from you if your level is high, and approach when lured by food items. Chaining encounters together by luring with food is usually the fastest way to level up quickly in Bravely Default 2. Visually, Bravely Default 2 is at odds with itself. The textures of the natural features like water and plants are stunningly detailed, but the enemy models and even the main characters in the field look like wrong-sized dolls in a lifelike diorama. The job costume designs are stellar. A personal favorite of mine is the monk's flower-patterned shirts, but look like they're in a different game from those character models. I won't spoil anything beyond the first chapter of Bravely Default 2's story, but tonally it was all over the place. The main plot and events of the first chapter almost feel too simple and saccharine, as if it was written 25 years ago, but a few dark twists in the middle chapters are jaw-dropping, and there's a real character growth from all of the lead roles other than Seth, who is so basic his journey even begins on a dark and stormy night. Bravely Default 2 has one or two moments of subversion of RPG tropes near the end, but lacks the meta-commentary on RPGs that Bravely Default and Bravely Second had, which I consider a crucial cog in the Bravely machine. I went into the endgame expecting a wild ride, but got a slightly bumpy roll to a stop. I'm not sure how I feel about Bravely Default 2, despite playing it for over 50 hours and pondering it for weeks afterwards. I unlocked every job, saw multiple endings, and did a few optional post-game boss fights. I love the job system and most of the combat, and I'm willing to overlook a few of the more tedious parts of the game, but some no-brainer pieces are missing. Badly organized side quest lists in a game overstuffed with side quests. odd visual choices that make probably okay character models look worse. Lots of well-communicated information in battle, but no way to keep track of enemy counter mechanics. No way to save equipment or job loadouts. And worst of all, frustrating load times and frequent slowdown, present in both Switch positions but especially bad in handheld mode. That's uncharacteristic of both Switch-exclusive games and Square Enix games. Those visual and technical annoyances and failure to stick the landing properly on its otherwise strong narrative muddied the experience for me. Bravely Default 2 is a beautiful, interesting throwback RPG that falls short of its full potential because of small details. The 2020 worldwide pandemic during Bravely Default 2's development may be a factor, but I wonder if this twice-delayed game needed a few extra months. So what's your favorite game with Bravely in its name? Do you have a favorite job in this fine example of an RPG job class system? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to check out RPGFan on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch. For RPG-related news, reviews, podcasts, and more, visit rpgfan.com. Thanks for watching.